mani bo per tan fort che pam sinti calor di bo morrinia o cabo vers.
It's time for Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla. Stay tuned for insights, impact, and inspiration right here on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And 2100 hours it is on this Friday, the 11th of December 2025, Africa World Hour. 60 minutes of the very latest news and developments around the heart of Africa and beyond, wherever you are listening from, whichever corner of the globe you're listening from. Please do share your perspective. You can do that on our WhatsApp hotline number. It's +27 63 406 9126. So that's +27 63 406 9126, and we are available on the socials as well at Channel Africa 1, and you can stream live on YouTube on that address as well at Channel Africa 1. Let's go straight to your top stories now.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
At minutes past 9, we start with this story. The Republican-controlled Senate in the U.S. state of Indiana voting against a new congressional district map. We'll get to that in just a moment. But let's just start with this. The man who coordinated the Nobel Peace Prize winner Mariana Corina Machado's secret escape from Venezuela, telling the BBC her journey involved a land operation, 2 boats and a flight. Brian Stern, a U.S. Special Forces veteran, described the opposition leader as formidable as she braved cold, rough seas with waves of up to 3 meters high in the dead of the night.
It's not Uber. It's not, I will go to the beach and get on the boat and then it will meet me. There's things falling from the sky. There are people trying to kill her, people trying to kill us because we know her. I don't want to get into specific things that we did, but suffice it to say that lots of different things were done to mask her physical signature, meaning her face is the big one, and also her digital signature as well.
Now back to that story about the Republican-controlled Senate in the U.S. state of Indiana voting against a new congressional district map. It would have helped the party retain its slender majority in the federal House of Representatives in midterm elections next year. The vote marks a rare instance of Republicans defying President Donald Trump. The BBC's Sean Dilly reports.
The defeat in Indiana is a significant blow to President Trump and his national push to redraw voting maps. It matters because the attempt to change the districts in a way that would have benefited Republicans has been thwarted by Republicans in a very public challenge to President Trump. The scale of the rebellion is also significant. The move had already been passed by members of Indiana's lower chamber, and Donald Trump had used social media to tell any Republican senator who did not support remapping he'd support any electoral challenger to them.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will meet his Belgian counterpart Bart de Wever today to discuss plans to use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Belgium holds most of the 200 billion euros worth of assets. The BBC's James Landale has more.
There are about 200 billion euros worth of Russian assets frozen in EU financial institutions. The European Commission wants to use them as collateral to loan about 90 billion euros to Ukraine over 2 years. The loan would be called in only if Moscow one day paid Kiev reparations. But most of the assets are held in Belgium, and it says it won't support the plan unless the legal and financial risks are shared more equally. EU leaders hope to agree a deal at a summit in Brussels next week.
An emergency services company has confirmed that 2 people believed to be construction workers have died after A four-story temple collapsed at Redcliffe in Verulam area of Durban in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. Preliminary reports indicate that the temple was fully functional and that another structure was being constructed on top of it. Several people have been hospitalized. IPSS spokesperson Kelsey J. Myrick.
An update from the scene of the Verulam structural collapse. Currently, it has been confirmed that 2 people have sadly been declared deceased, still entrapped in the rubble, as well as a further 3 are still believed to be alive but entrapped under the rubble. 5 people who were trapped on one side of the building were able to be rescued with no to minor injuries. Rescuers are now working on how to safely get to the people and the deceased that are entrapped in the rubble.
Scientists say the devastating cyclone that ripped through the Indonesian island of Sumatra 2 weeks ago was an extinction-level disturbance for the world's rarest great ape, the Tapanuli orangutan rather. Fewer than 800 live in the wild, and it's feared that up to about 10% were killed by huge landslides in the forest habitat. The BBC's Sebastian Asher reports.
Conservationists say there's an unsettling silence in their forest habitat, which was devastated by landslides caused by heavy flooding. Fewer than 800 of the great apes live in the wild. Any loss, experts say, would have a serious impact on their survival as a species. The discovery of what appears to be a dead orangutan, half buried under mud and logs, has fueled fears that others may also have been killed, although some locals believe the apes would have escaped before disaster struck, with their heightened sense of impending danger.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And just about 7 minutes past 9, you are listening to Africa World Hour. It is a festive season, and we know typically at this time that while people enjoy their festivities, there are those who find themselves in mental health despair. So South Africans worry about making financial ends meet in January, typically. This is contained in the South African Depression and Anxiety Group 2025 Festive Feeling Study. The survey shows how South Africans feel during the holiday season. The study collected over 2,000 valid responses from across the country. Tuto Ngobeni has more on that.
The South African Depression and Anxiety Group SADC has released the results of its 2025 Festive Feeling Study, showing how South Africans feel during the holiday season. The study collected 2,095 valid responses from people aged between ages 18 and 65 years across the country, with most respondents from Gauteng, Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal provinces. People from different backgrounds took part, including employed, unemployed, self-employed and students. Senior Research Associate at the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Brownen Dozanowski Venter, says they were interested in covering suicide rates.
The 2025 SADC Festive Feelings Survey was conducted partly online and partly through hard copy research that we managed to obtain from our containers in Ivory Park and Diepsloot. We managed to achieve valid responses from 2,095 individuals. And the survey was really focused on working out how SADC could best support individuals who might be struggling this festive season. We were also interested in uncovering reasons behind the suicide trends, which we've noticed, where we've seen that there are increased cases of suicide around December and January each year, and that men are particularly vulnerable. So that was sort of part of our main motivation for doing the research.
Some of the key findings of the survey include 73% of the respondents worry about making financial ends meet in January, the most common festive season stressor, while 69% feel anxious about not having enough money to spoil or support loved ones this December. Dozanowski Venter says the key findings are divided into 3 categories, with women feeling overwhelmed while men opt to disconnect.
In terms of our key findings, we discovered that people's festive feelings could be split into 3 categories. That would be thriving, surviving, and disconnecting. Now, the people who were thriving were anticipating Christmas with great excitement, whereas the people who were surviving were experiencing a lot of depression and anxiety and experiencing high levels of stress as they anticipated the festive season. A main part of the stress had to do with the fact that people really felt that they didn't have enough money to spoil their loved ones. So it was definitely a concern about getting by, and parents in particular were quite concerned about how they would afford the new year. And in fact, school supplies and things like that were in front of mind. A lot of people, though, whether they were parents or not, had previously experienced January, and as a consequence, people were quite worried about money. Though what we do see is that for men in particular, it's an especially large worry. While both men and women were concerned about being lonely during the festive season, it was definitely a case that women felt that they might be lonely in a crowd, as they were very overwhelmed maintaining all kinds of social obligations, cooking and feeding and taking care of lots of people, whereas men generally tended to be part of the disconnecting group. And a big reason why they wanted to disconnect was really because they felt that if they couldn't afford a really expensive Christmas, then perhaps it wouldn't be worthwhile spending time with family and friends.
Dozornowski Fenter says the recommendations of the survey is for people to have honest conversations about what they can afford around this time of the year and understand that money is part of their resources and also impacts their energy.
So some of the main recommendations that we'd like to make revolve around setting expectations with people, having a conversation and being quite honest about what we can and can't afford at this time of year. We also have to understand that money is one of our resources, but our energy is another one. So while we should be trying to connect and have good quality connections, we should also be trying to avoid numbing out completely and disconnecting from others this festive season. One of the ways that we can do that is to do regular check-ins with one another and also make sure that every person feels that they have inherent value. So in other words, if you can't afford to buy a gift, but you still have affection, well, that care and affection for one another is free.
Those who are finding it difficult to cope at any point in their lives are encouraged to seek help from experts. For Channel Africa News, I am Tuto Ngobeni in Johannesburg.
Now to news about Malawi, where tensions are mounting after police confirmed the arrest of former Trade and Industry Minister and recent MCP running mate Vitumbiko Mumba in Lilongwe. The arrest is reportedly linked to a post-election press briefing where he and other MCP officials alleged alleged electoral fraud before official results were released. Furthermore, police spokesperson Lal Chimtembo has also confirmed the arrest of MCP Secretary General Richard Chimwendo Banda, making him the second senior party official detained within hours. We are joined now by Malawian political analyst Victor Chipofya to speak about these developments. A very good evening to you, Mr. Chipofya. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So just can you explain to us the specific laws or sections of the penal code that authorities would have relied on to justify the arrests of Vitumbiko Mumba and Richard Chimwendo Banda?
No, thank you so much, Tsepiso, for having me. Well, I mean, there has not been any clear information as to why the two have been picked. There's just been fuel information that has been coming here and there on social media. One of the key things, I think, with Vitumbiko Mumba that came out was the fact that he had held a press briefing when we're going through the election, where he did stipulate to say that there was some rigging that was happening. That's basically the information that we have. And the other information that we have at the moment is that the Secretary General for the Malawi Congress Party, Honorable Richard Chimwendo Banda, handed himself over to the police. And from the information that we have as well, is just that he's been charged of attempted murder, which has not really been clarified as to what exactly that may entail. So I think that's where we are as of now as a country. There is no really laws that I would be able to share with you to say that they're quoted this particular law. For the moment, I think everybody else is just waiting to see what the exactly the charges will be leveled against these people.
But are these arrests unprecedented?
They're not unprecedented. The issue is that every time that there's government change, and this is not just for Malawi, this is something that has happened in Africa, in our democracy. And these are things that I think we all as Africans need to start looking at addressing in terms of how we're going to be able to consolidate our democracy and also strengthen our institutions. Is to have the institutions to be very apolitical in the way that they deal with issues. Because it seems like the democratic institutions that were established are always used as hunting dogs against the opposition political parties. Because we saw this in 2020 when governments changed, when DPP, which is now in government, was ousted then by the Tonse Alliance. We saw similar arrests happening. And we saw the same arrests happening in 2014 when DPP came into power, ousting out the then People's Party. We saw the same arrests happening in 2012 after the death of our late president, Bingu Mutharika. When Joyce Banda took over power, there were similar arrests. And just as Bingu, when he took over power from Bakile Muluzi in 2004, there were also similar arrests. So it seems as if the institutions have constantly been used as as a hunting dog against people that are fighting, that are in the opposition. So that waters down the issue of institutionalism. It waters down the independence of our constitution from being abused by people that are in political authority. And unfortunately, this is becoming a culture. And as I say, not just in Malawi, this is something that is even happening across the board. We see that in other countries, even within the SADC region.
And just looking at the reasons that they have been arrested, I'm just wondering, just with regards to Malawian law and freedom of expression, does that, counter what the criminal justice system says about exercising that, especially within a political environment for people who are high-ranking political officials? Just trying to get a sense of the rationale behind the arrests.
Well, one thing that is clear when we talk about the law, everybody is presumed innocent until they're proven guilty in front of the competent court of law. So the reasons behind the arrests right now, each one of us in Malawi will be speculating because we don't know what exactly is happening. Because any rational being would say that these are innocent people until they've been taken to the court of law, and then they've been proven guilty in front of the court of law. And as I say, precedents would tell us to say that we've seen similar arrests before, where people would be locked up as a way of punishment, really, not necessarily as a way of seeking justice, because I believe that justice needs to end up in the court of law determining whether one is guilty or innocent. So unfortunately, we have not seen that happening in our country. We have not seen that happening in Africa, for instance, for a very long time. So to answer your question, I would be speculating if I say that these are politically motivated. But based on the facts that we have and the precedents and how we've seen things happen before, I think I would be 70% to 80% right if I would say that most of these would be politically motivated. And the unfortunate part about that is maybe some of these people would have truly committed those atrocities. Maybe some of these people would have truly broken the law. But now the line is so thin that you cannot draw from what is actually breaking the law and what is actually something that is a politically motivated arrest.
So if you say politically motivated, then who are the culprits in ensuring these high-level arrests? What would be, or should I say, to what end?
You see, as a country, Malawi, we've got the institutions that were established when we adopted the democratic dispensation in 1994. But the unfortunate part is that there hasn't been that much of independence in the way that these institutions operate. They're always controlled by the people that are in power at that time. Because, for instance, in Malawi, the Inspector General of Police is directly appointed by the president, who is the head of the executive arm of the government, from which most of the instructions would come. And obviously, there's that saying to say that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So if I was appointed as Inspector General of Police, I would definitely take instructions from my masters, who happen to be people that are politically motivated. We've got the Anti-Corruption Bureau. For a long time, there's been a talk to say that the chairperson of that institution should be somebody who is independently appointed to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in the way that they're going to handle issues. But up to now, that's just been talk. We've seen presidents come, presidents go, and they still appoint these people. So the challenge that we have is that the institutions are there, the laws are there, but the practicality of it, I always say that there's a difference between having a constitution and then having a spirit of constitutionalism, where now you're practicing what you have in your constitution. I think that's a challenge. And I'll keep emphasizing this to say it's not just Malawi, it's an issue of Africa. And I should quote the words of the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. He did say that Africa suffers from a problem, the big man syndrome problem, whereby power has always been centralized on a few individuals. Therefore, you're taking it away from the institutions that were actually established. And in that sense, it's very difficult for us to be able to consolidate our democracy to make sure that things are done by the book and for the benefit of the people.
And more importantly, I want to look at the core allegations, and that is, allegations of fraud of the electoral process. Have these been definitively disputed, as in by the Electoral Commission? Has there been evidence that has been presented to counter these allegations?
Well, the law is clear. We've got the Electoral Commission Act that stipulates to say that if anybody has got any allegations against anybody that they've been competing against in an election, they're given a time period where they could be able to address these issues, bring them before the Electoral Commission, and then the Electoral Commission needs to now look into these allegations, and if they see that there are issues, then it's pushed towards the judiciary, the courts, that are now, they employ the laws of natural justice, where both sides are given a chance to be heard. And after that, the competent courts of law are able to determine. Outside of that, there's just going to be allegations. We have seen a number of cases, not even just at the presidential level, but even at parliamentary level. We've seen the courts overrule some of the complaints that were being lodged by some of the candidates who claimed to say that the elections had been rigged. And after the judges and the magistrates had reviewed the cases, looking at the evidence that was laid before them, they overthrew most of the cases. I should say that as of now, we're looking at 70 to 80% again of the cases that were brought before the courts of law by different people who participated in the 16th September election, who the courts have said that there was no case at all. So obviously, if I was competing in an election against you and I have lost, and I do believe that I should have won because there were people that were supporting me, I'm going to have myself on the social media, I'm going to have press briefings to say that I've won. but those are just opinions up until the Electoral Commission, which is the body that was mandated to determine a winner or a loser in an election, to say that there was indeed fraud that had occurred or there wasn't fraud that had occurred, to determine or to agree with my allegation or to say that my allegation is actually not valid.
I really thank you for your time, Malawian political analyst Victor Chipofya, who is speaking to us about those developments in Malawi. Two high-powered politicians arrested over their allegations of fraud.
The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Muranziwa wa mina. Muranziwa means my love in Xitsonga. So if you're listening to this, just know that you're my love. Yes, you and I are an item. We're dating. We are together. So I love you, baby. Why are you blushing? Why are you blushing? Like, haven't you heard somebody confessing their love to you? I mean, you gotta get used to it now, because I'm gonna tell you this every day, that I love you. I can tell you, there are so many people who are never told they are loved. I come to the studio every Monday, 12 to 3, because I've got an appointment with you. I take you serious. Forget about the other person, right? Moranziwa.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege. Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mokoenata@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
Tensions rising in the Caribbean after the United States seized the sanctioned Venezuelan supertanker skipper off the Venezuelan coast, one of Washington's most forceful enforcement actions in years. The tanker carrying Venezuelan crude is now under U.S. control as part of mounting pressure on the Maduro government. Following the operation, more than 30 other Venezuelan-linked vessels under U.S. sanctions are now considered at risk, with ship owners rethinking voyage to the country's ports. We're now joined by Phyllis Bennis, Fellow of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. A very good evening to you, and thanks so much for speaking to us, Phyllis.
Of course. Glad to be with you.
So how would you characterize what is going on here, and do you think that the action that has been taken by the United States is a statement on its foreign policy direction here on?
It definitely is an expression of the Trump administration's view of foreign policy. Just a couple of hours ago, Admiral Halsey, who had been the commander of that part of Southern Command, including in command of these attacks on the supposedly drug boats, resigned. And it now has become clear publicly that President Trump asked him to leave because he had concerns. He raised concerns about the legality or potential illegality of the strikes on the boats. And he wanted cooperation at the regional level, which was certainly not on the Trump administration's agenda. What we are seeing, in a sense, it's easier to say what this was not about than what it is. This was not about drugs. The drugs, particularly fentanyl, that are playing such a devastating role in the United States, with the deaths of so many young people in particular, do not come from Venezuela. They come mainly, production is in China, the transit is through Mexico. The small amount of drugs that come from anywhere near Venezuela is mostly cocaine, which is not what is killing people. So it's not about drugs. It's not about crime. It's about some combination, and we don't exactly know where this stands, of oil. Of course, Venezuela holds the largest oil reserves now in the world. It's about money. Is this an opportunity for President Trump's son, Jared Kushner, who's been involved in so many of the negotiations around the world, to establish a foothold in, for example, a post-Maduro Venezuela? Is that the goal here? And then there's ideology, which plays a very important role, particularly with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is a hardcore ideologue opposed to Cuba. And there's a wide view that going after Venezuela, weakening Venezuela even further, will influence Cuba to the detriment of Cuba, because for many, many years, the sale of oil in Venezuela, money was given to Cuba to help in the revolutionary process years back. That hasn't been true for quite some time as the economy in Venezuela has collapsed, but it is a factor. So all of these are factors. How they fit together, which ones are paramount, is not so clear yet. But we do know that this was another illegal act. You know, the U.S. claim is, well, we did all the paperwork, we went to court. And in the context of U.S. law, that may well be true. We're not sure yet, but it could be that they got all the judges to sign off on all the requisite papers. That doesn't make it legal internationally, in terms of international law. In the context of the small boats that were attacked and where so many people have been killed, 87 so far, just in the last 3 months on these boats, there is no legal justification, not in domestic law, not in international law.
And that's what I wanted to get to, international law and the actions of the United States, in which obviously it would itself frame as a defensive rather than offensive, and also judging by what President Donald Trump himself has said about Maduro's tenure and government, is it not fair to think that this is wholly directed at unseating President Maduro? And also, as you say, there's oil on that ship and it was destined for Cuba.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know for sure that regime change is necessarily the goal here. That's certainly one of the possibilities. Another possibility, there was a conversation that we know nothing about the substance of, but we know it happened, between Maduro and President Trump. And we do know that Trump has a habit of sending his very close friend and fellow real estate broker to be his top negotiator, whether it was in Gaza or in Ukraine, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. It may be that the goal would be to get an agreement from Maduro to step down voluntarily, have his perhaps vice president take over for a while, and he would be set up in a wealthy exile somewhere. And in the meantime, there would be a deal reached between some U.S. oil company, which maybe would happen to have significant money invested from Jared Kushner, for instance, or from someone else in the Trump orbit. All of those things are possible because they've been done before in other arenas. We saw it in Gaza. We've seen it before. So there's a very uncertain question about, is this straight up regime change? They just want that government out and they want to establish a new regime. This is a president who came into office condemning the idea of nation building, that it was fine for the U.S. to take the oil from Iraq, but the idea that it had any responsibility to try and rebuild the country, something that we know they didn't do very well, but they claimed they were, that's not what he is all about, that he's against that. So is he changing his mind on this? This is all still uncertain. But we do know that in the U.S. strategic study that was just released a few days ago, it was very clear that they are making a new focus on Latin America, giving up on the so-called pivot to China, and looking at the history of the Monroe Doctrine of 100 some odd years ago, 150 years ago, I suppose, which claimed that the United States recognizes that all of Latin America belongs to us. Regional hegemony is the name of the game. And this is potentially something that the U.S. would want to negotiate with China, maybe give them control of various parts of Asia and give Russia control of certain parts of Europe. All of that is possible. But this is a very serious action in terms of potential consequences.
And that's the point I want to get to. Can militaristic action deal with what ought to be dealt with through diplomatic channels?
Well, ultimately, as we've seen in the U.S. history recently, whether it was Iraq, Afghanistan, and earlier examples as well, no, it does not solve the problem. Part of the issue we're dealing with here is we're not clear what the problem is exactly. There's been a huge problem of the Venezuelan economy collapsing, leading to the self-exile of something like 8 million people who simply could not make enough money to feed their kids in their country, and so they fled to countries abroad. Now, is that problem going to be solved by regime change? Certainly not. But that's not the problem that President Bush says he's dealing with. He says he's dealing with drugs. That's the problem. This is not going to help that issue. The issue of fentanyl, which is indeed a problem, is indeed responsible for thousands of deaths in the United States. That's coming in over land borders into the United States. Some is made in the U.S. None of it is coming from Venezuela or the area around Venezuela. So no, that's not going to be solved. The notion that this is somehow going to lead to the collapse of Cuba, that's not likely either. So none of these issues are going to be solved by a military response,
but
except for the fact of power.
It also requires some self-reflection, though, doesn't it? Because supply meets demand. It's a basic law of economics. So isn't an internal dealing of the problem more rational in terms of the first port of call in action rather than targeting a Venezuelan oil tanker?
Of course, absolutely. The fact that money has been stripped from various healthcare allocations and more is about to be stripped. People can't get medical support, medical health for dealing with addiction. That's a huge problem in the U.S. People simply can't afford to get treatment. That's about to become worse, significantly worse, as the remaining governmental amounts of money that have been available are disappearing after the first of the year. So that's going to be worse and not better. The notion that this is somehow going to deal with the problem of drug addiction internally is also belied by the fact that that President Trump personally just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was serving a 45-year sentence in U.S. prisons for his direct role in the import of drugs to the United States. So if this was seriously a concern about drugs, a number of these actions would not be going forward. The fact that they are is just more evidence that this isn't about drugs. This is not going to help that problem because it's not designed to respond to that problem.
Phyllis, we thank you for your time and insights as always. Phyllis Bennis is a fellow of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., speaking about the ongoing rift between the U.S. and Venezuela.
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
There's a Ugandan lawmaker. His name is Atkins Katusabe, who speaks with an American accent in Parliament. So the parliamentarians have complained that we don't understand what you are saying.
Listen to him. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I think this is a disaster that it could cause an extinction of our entire community. Going to procedure.
Mr. Speaker, the English that is trying to put this matter here is confusing a number of us and making us miss very serious issue. It needs to speak the common English of Uganda. The English is too much.
Need a piece of paper so that we'll be able to read. The English is too much. I picture him saying order, out of order.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time. The pulse of the continent in 60 minutes. Stay informed and inspired with Africa World Hour on Channel Africa.
And we continue with Africa World Hour. South Africa has joined the global community in marking Universal Health Coverage Day, a campaign led by UHC 2030 and supported by the World Health Organization, World Bank and OECD to push for accessible, affordable healthcare for all. This year's theme highlights rising global concerns over healthcare expenses, but in South Africa, the push toward universal healthcare through the National Health Insurance System towards universal care through the National Health Insurance System faces mounting legal challenges, raising questions about how quickly quickly the country can realize its UHC goals. To speak to us about this is South Africa's Health Minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. A very good evening to you, Minister. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on a Friday evening. I know you're probably thinking she can't really be thinking of wanting to talk about this at almost midnight. But thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, Tebiso, and greetings to the listeners and viewers out there.
As I'm sure you know, Minister, UHC is something that I'm very passionate about, and just thinking about it, that the springboard of our conversation is NHI. It negates the important conversation, I find, that because South Africans seem to be torn about it, but why do South Africans recognize the need, the importance of universal healthcare coverage, but not NHI? And I'm not speaking for or against, but I'm just trying to understand why the ideas are so divergent to so many people.
Well, Tepiso, the healthcare system in South Africa is deeply financialized. And a financialized healthcare system is always at odds with universal health coverage. In May this year, the professor of health economics at the London School of Health Economics, Professor Yates, said South Africa must dump its American style of healthcare system because it's not helpful to them. Now, another prominent health leader, the former Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Margaret Chan, also asked me the same question. He said, Minister, your health system is British. The curriculum, the titles, nomenclatures, and all that are British. But when it comes to healthcare financing, you go American. And she even said, don't you know that that is the worst that America ever bequeathed to the world? What is meant by an American healthcare type of healthcare system? It's a healthcare system that is deeply financialized. And what is a financialized healthcare system? It's a system where money and investments and profits supersedes healthcare needs, health as a public good. And now, unfortunately, when you are working in the environment of a highly financialized healthcare system like ours is in South Africa, when you introduce things like universal health coverage, there's no way, I mean, NHI, there's no way they will agree with you. But they know that the whole world is vouching, as you are saying, for universal health coverage. They know that it was even adopted by United Nations General Assembly. So the best way to confuse people is to go out publicly, not only people, even judges, because those people who took us to court, in the affidavits, they start by saying they support universal health coverage, because they look very bad if they don't, or if they say they don't support universal health coverage. They look very bad, because universal health coverage say no one may be left behind. But then in order to confuse people and still achieve what they want, they say we support universal health coverage, but not NHI, trying to separate what we are doing with what the rest of the world is doing.
So is it something that you, and I know this pretty much was an effort that you championed in your previous role as health minister, is it because of the financial models? Because that's what we keep on hearing. And is that what you mean by a heavily financialized healthcare system? Because as you speak, it's a no-brainer for me. UHC is a constitutional impairment. It's a constitutional, it's a constitutional right. So why are we still at this point? Why are we still arguing it?
Well, you are aware that the act has been passed and the president assented to it, but you are aware that we've been taken to court. It's not that we are not continuing. We are continuing with NHI, but quite a number of things which we could have done we are not able to do so because, as I'm saying, we are in court. And I'm trying to explain to you, as you ask, why is it that we have been taken to court when other countries have not been? And I'm saying it's because of a financialized, heavily financialized healthcare system. Maybe I need to explain what is meant by an increased private financialized healthcare system. A financialized healthcare system is the one in which private financial interest supersedes the needs of health, where equity firms, intermediaries, financial insurance, banking institutions are all rushing to invest in health, but not for health as a good, but for the profit part of it. And once you take profits and put them up front, there are definitely going to be very bad outcomes.
And have you tried to reach a middle ground? Where are the stickler points? Why are you not able to push through with these legal battles? Because they keep on mounting. There are political parties that are digging in their heels. And as you say, they do believe in universal healthcare coverage, and they do believe that NHI is a necessity, but it's the manner which the Department of Health is approaching it. Where is the blind spot in this intention of inculcating access to health for all?
Why should we believe them? Why should we believe them? Because all their proposals are against the word universal. Look, Tshepiso, we have just called the world here for G20. And throughout the whole year, we were sailing a theme to them: solidarity, equity, and sustainability. And the whole world bought into it. And we bravely said we are all supporting it. Even the private sector in South Africa said so. But when the world leaves, we rush to court again and say we don't want this. Basically, we are saying we don't want this solidarity, we don't want equity, because the South African healthcare system is highly inequitable. I'm sure you know that. We are the most unequal society in the whole world. You know that. We've got the highest Gini coefficient. If you want to see that gross inequality in South Africa, you come to the Department of Health, where 14% of the population enjoys private healthcare, which gives a healthcare system as good as any you can find in Europe, but 86% of the population is not covered. A very highly subsidized private healthcare system, which is subsidized by the state at the expense of the poor. And that's exactly what NHI wants to correct. And they are taking us to court for that. Now, what will be the middle ground, by the way? What do we mean when we say the middle ground? Because I'll understand the middle ground to be saying we must agree that if both of us have got diabetes, but you are richer than me, you must get better treatment for your diabetes than me, but we have got the same disease. If you have got cancer and also have cancer, then you must get a better treatment and get all the best that cancer therapy can offer, but I cannot get that. That's what it means. So what will be the middle ground in that regard?
Look, South Africa historically not only unequal, as you say, but just even legislatively, it was clear that the minority would enjoy the spoils of the capacity. And the issue of capacity is something that people point to when it comes to public healthcare institutions. They argue that we cannot be funding money to a healthcare system that itself is in disarray, where even the health ombuds points to facilities displaying brazen negligence and mistakes that can be avoided. How do you argue back that getting more money into the public health system will alleviate this, when people argue that as it is, it cannot be fixed?
Why is it in disarray, Tshepiso? Let's start there. Why is it in disarray? They will tell you all sorts of things about corruption, maladministration, etc., which I do not, of course, challenge because they are happening and we are all obviously fighting them. But Tshepiso, let's look at the financing of healthcare because everything starts there. Out of the 6 building blocks of a healthcare system, if you can't get the financing right, then you get stories like this disarray in public healthcare, etc. And let me explain to you, Tshepiso. World Health Organization says in order for a healthcare system not to be in disarray, countries must spend at least 5% of their GDP on health. 5%. In South Africa, we are already at 8.5% of the GDP on health. And countries in Europe are averagely at between 9 and 10.5%. So we are not very far from them. But our public healthcare system, as you say, is in disarray. They will give you all the other reasons except the core reason. And the core reason is that in the healthcare expenditure of the country, the 8.5% of the GDP, 51% goes to only 14% of the population. 51% of healthcare expenditure in South Africa goes to 14% of the population. And the remaining 86% of the population, who are the ones who go to public health care, have to do with the remaining 49%. That is gross inequality. And because human beings follow money, Tshepiso, everywhere in the world, they follow resources. And so because the resources are on the part where the 14% is, they go there in large numbers. Let me just give you a good example. Because of the manner in which private healthcare is very heavily funded, even subsidized by this very same government, is heavily subsidized, I'm sure you know that, to the tune of 70 billion rand per year for people who are on medical aids and working for the state, and to the tune of 33 billion rand per annum for medical aid credits. That money could be going to help and relieve this disarray you are talking about. Let me just give you an example how that affects us. There's one private clinic in the center of Johannesburg. It has got 57 gynecologists. They are all attracted there because there are resources. That total number of gynecologists is more than the total number of gynecologists in Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Northwest, all added together. 3 provinces cannot raise a number of gynecologists as is one clinic. That is the extent of the disparity, the extent of the gross inequality. Then do you expect that there should be no disarray? With that 49%, we must practice primary health care, we must immunize children, we must give contraception, we must vaccinate the population. That doesn't have to be done by the private sector with the 51% of healthcare expenditure. So disarray is caused more by gross inequality. The issues of corruption, like what happened in Tembisa, we see them and we don't support them. And that's why we're going to fight ferociously to reverse what has happened. But then you can't say because in Tembisa Hospital there's been massive corruption, then the masses do not deserve universal health coverage. You can't do so because even in the private sector there's corruption. They themselves mention that is up to the tune of 29 billion. But in the media, you don't call it corruption. You call it leakage and all the other nice terms. But it is still corruption. But nobody is saying private healthcare and medical aid system must stop because there's corruption to the tune of 29 billion rand. But when there's corruption to the tune of 2 billion rand in Tembisa, everybody says then the masses cannot get universal health coverage. I don't understand that type of reasoning.
Minister, I certainly would call corruption, and it would be irrespective of whether it's public or healthcare institutions for me. And certainly I don't applaud private institutions that are found to be selling kidneys to overseas tourists without their knowledge in terms of the trafficking of organs. That's what really is. I'll go back on topic though and say, what is the what are the consequences of not having NHI? I mean, I know a lot of people in these tough economic times who have been paying medical aid, but when it comes to, and I have my own personal experience about it, I've been very open about it, when it comes to being given those services, using those savings, suddenly they're not there. They find reasons for not paying up. How will NHI make the difference here?
Tepiso, if there's no universal health coverage in a particular country, the economy won't grow, because health and economic growth, they go together, because no country can build any economy with sick people who are always absent from work because of illness, who don't have energy. Let me give you an example, Tepiso. If in 2010, we did not launch the world's biggest HIV counseling, testing and treatment campaign, whereby whether you are a billionaire or you are a sex worker or you are a domestic worker or you are a gardener or a security officer or just sitting in the streets, when we needed to test you for HIV/AIDS, we treat you the same. We treat you the same. We give you counseling, we test you. If you are positive, we put you on ARVs, disregard of your financial status. If we did not do that, I can tell you with my eyes closed, many firms, many factories of South Africa will have collapsed. The economy will not be where it was today. Maternal mortality was sky high. The number of children born HIV positive was sky high. If we did not treat them, regardless of their socio-economic status, the economy will have collapsed. So that is the consequences of not having universal health coverage. Because many people will get sick. Like now, Tepiso, you are aware that the new scourge, the new pandemic, is what you call non-communicable diseases. Diabetes, high blood pressure, strokes, cancer. If more and more people suffer those and they cannot be treated because they cannot afford financially, because only 14% of the people who are on medical aid, even those who are on medical aid sometimes do not afford. When their money gets finished, they send them away. So if we don't do that, the consequences will that the economy of the country will eventually collapse. It's as simple as that.
Minister, we thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts with us, speaking to us as the world observes Universal Health Coverage Day. And Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi is South Africa's health minister, reflecting on how the country is contending with this, trying to ensure that there is access to good quality healthcare for all through the implementation of the NHI and the struggles that the country is experiencing. It brings the time now to 2 minutes to 10. Shailen Dukumana is coming up next with African Diaries. From us, it's a very good night and wishing you a pleasant weekend as well, a safe one at that. Until the next time, goodbye for now.